In the busy streets of Lubumbashi, there was a woman everyone called mad. Her name was Mama Chipo. She walked in torn wrappers, her hair always messy, her hands full of scraps she picked from the market floor. She often talked to herself, and that made children laugh and throw stones at her. Traders cursed whenever she passed, and neighbors spat near her feet. To the world, she was nothing but a burden, a cursed woman to be avoided. But what no one saw was the pain hidden in her tired eyes. Behind the broken clothes and the wandering words lived a woman carrying a wound far deeper than anyone could imagine. Every day she wandered the streets, yet there was a strange gentleness in her. She would give a hungry child the little food she found, even if it meant she stayed hungry. She never fought back when people insulted her. She simply bowed her head and kept walking, as though she carried a secret no one else could understand. People judged her by what they saw outside, never asking about her past, never wondering why her heart seemed so heavy. Mama Chipo lived on the edge of the city, in a tiny shack made of rusted iron sheets. At night, she sang soft lullabies to herself, as though trying to calm a baby no one else could see. Some thought it was madness, but maybe it was grief. Maybe she was remembering something too painful to tell. To everyone she was mad, but in truth, she was simply broken, and still surviving. One stormy night in Lubumbashi, the rain fell heavily, and thunder shook the sky. Outside St. Augustine's church, a tiny cry rose above the storm. People ran to see what it was, and there in a cardboard box lay a newborn baby girl, her skin cold and her tiny body trembling. Her mother had disappeared into the night, leaving her behind with nothing but the sound of her cries. The congregation gathered around, their faces full of worry and fear. Some whispered, "What bad luck this is." Others shook their heads and said, "We cannot keep her. She will only bring problems." One by one, families walked away. Some turned their backs quickly, afraid of what people would say if they took the child. Others muttered excuses, too poor, too busy, too scared. The baby's cries grew louder, but no one bent down to pick her up. To everyone there, she was already a burden. Nobody wanted to take the risk of raising a child who had been abandoned. She was helpless, alone, and unwanted. The rain poured harder, beating down on the little box, soaking her tiny blanket. Then, through the crowd, a figure appeared, tired, ragged, and wet from the storm. It was Mama Chipo, the woman everyone called mad. People stepped aside, some sneering, some laughing. "What is she doing here?" they whispered. But Mama Chipo did not listen. She bent down, lifted the crying baby, and pressed her against her chest. The baby's cries softened as if she knew she had finally found warmth. With tears mixing with the rain, Mama Chipo whispered, "From today, you are mine." The crowd gasped. Some laughed cruelly, saying, "Even the mad woman now wants a child." Others shook their heads in disbelief. But Mama Chipo held the baby tighter, rocking her gently as though nothing else in the world mattered. For the first time in many years, there was light in her tired eyes. She walked away from the church that night, barefoot in the mud, with the baby wrapped in her torn shawl. The people watched in silence, never imagining that this small act of love would one day change everything. That baby, whom no one wanted, now had a mother. Not the kind of mother people respected, not the kind of mother who lived in a fine home or wore clean clothes, but a mother who had love enough to protect her when no one else would. From that night on, the mad woman of Lubumbashi was no longer walking alone. She carried a new life in her arms, a child who would one day grow to show the world the power of a love that everyone else rejected. And while the storm raged on, something beautiful was born, a bond that nothing could ever break. From the very first day Mama Chipo carried baby Amina home, life became a battle against mockery and rejection. At the market, women laughed openly. "Even the mad woman now raises children," they sneered, pointing as if it were a joke. Some traders chased Mama Chipo away whenever she tried to buy food, saying, "Go feed your madness elsewhere." As Amina grew, the insults did not stop. In fact, they became sharper. At school, teachers shook their heads and refused her admission. "Your mother is insane. We cannot have such a child here," they said coldly, slamming the door shut on her small dreams. Other children were no kinder. They would laugh and point at her on the way to the well. "Daughter of madness," they shouted, running after her, their voices filled with cruelty. Some threw pebbles. Some pulled at her clothes. The shame was heavy, but Amina never cried in front of them. She held her head high because she had watched her mother do the same. Mama Chipo never raised her voice at those who insulted her. She only looked at them with tired eyes and kept moving, her child's hand tightly in hers. Life was not easy. To feed Amina and keep her in school, Mama Chipo did every job people were willing to throw at her. She washed clothes until her hands were raw and swollen. She carried heavy loads on her back for a few coins. On days when no work came, she begged, not for herself, but for Amina's food and books. At night, when her body ached from the long day, she would still find the strength to sit with Amina, helping her with homework, even if all she could do was trace letters slowly with her finger on the ground. Amina watched her mother suffer every single day, and in her young heart she carried both pain and pride. Pain, because she saw the way people spat when Mama Chipo walked by, the way they cursed her name as though she was less than human. Pride, because no matter what they said, her mother never stopped fighting for her. Every torn wrapper, every scar on her hands, every insult swallowed in silence was proof of her bravery. To the world, Mama Chipo was nothing but a mad woman raising a child she had no right to raise. But to Amina, she was a giant. She was proof that love could survive hunger, shame, and cruelty. As the years passed, Amina held tightly to that truth. Her mother might have been broken in the eyes of the world, but in her eyes, Mama Chipo was the bravest woman alive. Amina was no ordinary child. Even as a little girl, her mind worked in ways that surprised everyone who dared to notice. By the age of 10, while other children were still learning their times tables, Amina was solving math problems so difficult that even university students struggled with them. Teachers who once refused her now sat in shock when they saw her notebooks filled with neat calculations and answers that made perfect sense. But talent alone did not fill empty stomachs, and her brilliance could not erase the poverty that chained her life. By 15, Amina was writing essays so powerful and moving that professors who came across her work wept as they read. Her words carried truth, pain, and beauty far beyond her years. Yet, every day she had to walk to school barefoot, carrying worn-out books tied together with string. Some teachers praised her intelligence quietly, but most ignored her because of who her mother was. Poverty made her shine less brightly in the eyes of a world that valued wealth more than genius. Sometimes the insults cut deeper than hunger. One afternoon, as she stood outside class, a schoolmate smirked at her and said cruelly, "No one will ever respect you. Your mother is nothing, and you will always be nothing too." The words burned inside her chest like fire. That evening, she sat in silence, her books untouched. For the first time, she wondered if her dreams meant anything at all, or if she should just give up. That night, Amina found Mama Chipo sitting outside their small shack, gazing at the stars. The night sky was wide and endless, filled with tiny lights. For a moment, they both sat in silence. Then Mama Chipo turned to her daughter and spoke softly but firmly. "Never be ashamed of me, Amina. Never. They can call me mad, they can laugh at me, but remember this, the stone they reject can one day become the cornerstone." Those words sank deep into Amina's heart. She looked at her mother, at her torn clothes, at her tired face, and realized something powerful. Mama Chipo was not weak. She was not mad. She was strong, stronger than anyone else she knew. She had carried shame, hunger, and cruelty on her shoulders and still stood tall for her daughter's sake. From that night on, Amina promised herself she would never be ashamed again. She studied harder, with a fire inside her that no insult could put out. She knew the world might continue to mock her, but she also knew her mother's words were true. One day, the stone that everyone rejected, the daughter of the mad woman, would rise and be the cornerstone of something greater. And in her heart, she carried the strength of the bravest woman she had ever known. At 17, Amina's life changed in a way nobody ever expected. After years of mockery and hardship, she won a full scholarship to the University of Nairobi. It was the first time she was leaving Lubumbashi, the first time she would step away from the dusty streets where she had been called Daughter of Madness. On the morning she left, she had nothing to carry with her but a small bag of clothes and her mother's torn shawl. Mama Chipo wrapped it gently around her shoulders and whispered, "This will remind you of home and of me." With tears in her eyes, Amina boarded the bus, knowing that every step she took was also her mother's victory. Nairobi was a different world. The city was alive with lights, opportunities, and people from everywhere. At first, Amina felt small among students who came from wealthy families, dressed in fine clothes, carrying expensive laptops. But she refused to be intimidated. She spent long nights in the library, buried in books, hungry not only for food but for knowledge. Her professors quickly noticed her brilliance. She wasn't just another student, she was extraordinary. By her second year, she was presenting research that caught the attention of investors and scholars from around the world. People who once doubted her now stood in awe as she spoke with confidence and clarity. By the age of 25, Amina had gone far beyond what anyone from Lubumbashi could have imagined. She launched a groundbreaking company in renewable energy, designing projects that could bring electricity to villages that had lived in darkness for generations. Her work began to change lives, and soon the world took notice. International awards followed her name, invitations poured in for her to speak at global conferences, and her face appeared on the covers of magazines. Reporters called her the pride of Africa, the young woman who had risen from nothing to become a symbol of hope. But through all the flashing cameras, through the applause and the recognition, Amina never forgot where she came from. Every time a reporter asked about her family, her smile would widen, but she never gave long answers. She simply smiled and carried her silence with grace. People wondered, why does she never speak about her family? Who raised such a brilliant woman? Yet Amina kept that secret close to her heart, saving the truth for a day when the world would be ready to hear it. Behind her success was always the memory of her mother's sacrifices, the nights Mama Chipo went to bed hungry so Amina could eat, the insults she swallowed so her daughter could stand tall, the strength she gave even when she had none left. Amina carried all of it within her as fuel, and every award she held felt like a quiet gift to the woman who had once been called mad. The world celebrated Amina, but she knew the real hero was waiting back home in Lubumbashi. And one day, she promised herself, the world would know her mother's name too. Years later, Amina returned to Lubumbashi, but this time she was not the poor barefoot girl people used to mock. She came back as a celebrated billionaire, a woman the whole world admired. The city buzzed with excitement when the news spread. Crowds filled the streets, desperate to see her with their own eyes. The same neighbors who once spat at Mama Chipo now stood at the roadside, straining their necks, whispering, "She is really coming back." Then the moment arrived. A long convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled into the city. Security guards stepped out first, followed by photographers and reporters with flashing cameras. The crowd gasped when the door opened and Amina stepped out. She looked elegant, her head held high, her presence commanding respect. People who once laughed at her mother now clapped and cheered, hoping she would notice them. For a moment, it felt like the whole city had forgotten how cruel it had once been. But then, as Amina walked forward, everyone saw her holding someone's hand. It was a frail, wrinkled hand, trembling slightly. And out of the car stepped Mama Chipo, still wrapped in her old torn shawl, her steps slow and uncertain. The whispers began immediately. "Is that not the mad woman? Why bring her here?" Some people looked away in shame. Others smirked, unable to believe that a billionaire would parade the woman they had all rejected. The crowd grew silent as Amina raised her voice. Her words were clear, and they cut through the whispers like fire. "This woman you see," she said, holding her mother's hand tighter, "the same woman you mocked, the same woman you rejected, is the only reason I stand here today. Without her love, I would be nothing." There was silence. Not a single person moved. Reporters froze, their cameras flashing, capturing the moment that felt bigger than any award Amina had ever won. The crowd of neighbors, traders, and children who once threw stones at Mama Chipo now lowered their heads. Shame burned on their faces as they remembered the insults, the laughter, the cruelty. They had once called her mad, but now they were staring at the truth. She was the mother of the woman the world now called a queen. Amina's voice shook with emotion as she continued. "You looked at her and saw madness. I looked at her and saw courage. You rejected her, but she lifted me up. Today, I return not just for myself, but for her. The world must know her name." Mama Chipo, weak and tired, stood quietly beside her daughter, tears filling her eyes. For the first time in her life, people were not throwing stones or spitting at her. They were listening. They were ashamed. And in that moment, everyone in Lubumbashi understood that the woman they had once despised was the very reason their city's name was now shining across the world. Then came the day that no one in Lubumbashi, or even in the whole country, could have imagined. Standing before a sea of people, with cameras flashing and reporters pushing forward to hear her words, Amina announced something that shook the ground beneath their feet. She told the crowd she was building Africa's largest children's research hospital, a place where sick and abandoned children would find care, hope, and love. People cheered wildly at first, clapping and shouting her name, proud to see someone from their city do something so great. But then Amina did something that left everyone stunned. When it was time to sign the papers, she bent over the table, and instead of writing her own name, she carefully signed the deeds under one name, Mama Chipo. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The reporters went silent. The crowd gasped. People blinked, thinking maybe they had not heard correctly. But Amina straightened her back, lifted her mother's frail hand into the air, and declared in a voice strong and steady, "This hospital, this gift to Africa, belongs to my mother. The world will remember Mama Chipo not as mad, not as broken, but as the mother who raised the girl nobody wanted, into a queen." The words rolled like thunder. Some people burst into tears on the spot. Others covered their mouths in shock. Reporters scrambled to write every word, their cameras clicking as if history itself was unfolding before them. Those who once mocked Mama Chipo now stared at her with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing. Mama Chipo, who had been called useless, cursed, and mad, now stood at the center of the world's attention. Her torn shawl, her weak frame, her wrinkled hands, all of it shone with a new meaning. She was no longer just the woman who wandered the streets talking to herself. She was the mother of a queen, the woman whose quiet love had created a legacy no one could erase. The crowd began to murmur. Some whispered prayers of forgiveness. Some wiped away tears. A few who had once mocked her now pushed forward, hoping to touch her hand, as if touching her might cleanse their past cruelty. And through it all, Amina stood proudly by her side, refusing to let go of her mother's hand. In that moment, a powerful truth spread through the city. Love had won. Sacrifice had triumphed. What the world rejected had become the very thing it needed most. Mama Chipo had no speeches to give, no wealth to show, but her love had raised a child who changed the world. And now, through Amina's act, her name would be carved forever in history. That mad woman was mad no more. She was honored, celebrated, and remembered as the mother who chose love when everyone else chose rejection. And as the people cheered through tears, Mama Chipo wept quietly, not from shame, but from joy. The kind of joy that comes when the world finally sees the truth you have carried all your life. The day of the unveiling came, and people from every corner of Lubumbashi filled the courtyard of the new hospital. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the air was heavy with expectation. At the center stood a tall white cloth, covering something everyone was waiting to see. When the cloth finally fell, the crowd gasped. There, in shining bronze, stood Mama Chipo, holding baby Amina close to her chest. The woman once called mad, once chased through the streets and mocked by children, was now standing proudly in the heart of a hospital that would save thousands of lives. The same neighbors who had once thrown stones now fell to their knees. Tears rolled down faces that once sneered at her. Some pressed their hands together in prayer, others cried openly, ashamed of how cruel they had been. They could not believe that the woman they had laughed at was now honored in such a way. It was as if the statue itself spoke, silencing every voice of mockery, every insult, every lie ever told about her. Mama Chipo stood before the statue, trembling, her eyes wet with tears she could no longer hold back. She had never imagined such a day. All her life she had been called cursed, broken, and mad. And now the world bowed to her name. Amina leaned close to her mother, holding her hand, and whispered softly in her ear, "You did the unthinkable, you loved me when no one else would. Now the world will love you forever." The crowd erupted in applause, but for Mama Chipo, it was not the sound of hands clapping that mattered. It was the sound of her daughter's voice, the voice of the baby she once lifted from a rain-soaked box, the baby who had grown into the woman who changed the world. In that moment, the legacy was sealed forever. The mad woman of Lubumbashi had become a legend of love.